Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'd like to welcome the team from Connexions. Rich Baraniuk is the Victor E. Cameron Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Rice University and is the founder of Connexions. For his research in the area of digital signal processing, he's received National Young Investigator Awards from the National Science Foundation and the Office of Naval Research. His lists and awards are truly endless. Joey King.
I made most of them up, actually.
Joey King is the Executive Director of Connexions, and previously he was an investment banker focused on incubating new technologies. He has extensive background as a technology entrepreneur and was on the founding team of F5 Networks and Zama Networks. He was also the Senior Research Scientist at the Human Interface Technology Lab of the University of Washington and is a fellow at the Advanced Telecommunications Research Institute in Tokyo. He holds a BA with honors from Southwestern University and a PhD from the University of Washington. Thanks again for joining us. I'd like to quickly remind you that our founders have agreed to archive this video on Google Video, so look forward to seeing it there. Please join me in welcoming the team.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I feel like a lounge lizard. Do people mind if I stand? Pardon me?
Start singing that some more and we're leaving.
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So I'm Rich Baraniuk. Thanks very much for the invitation to be here today. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about an education project that we've been working on at Rice for the last 6 years called Connexions. I'd like to tell you a little bit about where it came from, a little bit about the ideas behind it, and a little bit about the intellectual property issues and the technology issues. And I'd like to keep it like super relaxed, so feel free to interrupt me at any time with questions. And about halfway through, we can go and do a little bit of a demo. Does that sound okay to people? Okay. I think there's something coming in from offsite. Okay. So as a jumping off point, does anybody remember these? Anybody have any? Okay. Anybody still play them? Okay. So one of the ways that I want you to think about the Connexions is by starting to think about music and the music industry. And what is it that's so special about music that allows anyone in the world to be able to create musical information, allows anyone to be able to copy that information, make it their own, allows people to mix music together in different ways, either on different compilations or even in different pieces, and allows people to be able to burn their own music onto records, right? Either through a record contract or even just by themselves. And the three bottom words are basically appropriated from both an Apple advertising slogan and a book by Larry Lessig, okay? And so the key thing about this create, rip, mix, and burn culture is it's created an incredibly vibrant musical world that's very interactive, where people are connecting themselves into communities, connecting musical ideas, and creating music that's completely innovative and always up to date, okay? And the key thing to ask yourself is, why does the same thing not happen with books, okay, and educational materials and course materials, okay? Because I would argue that the publishing industry and the educational industries are anything but vibrant, interactive, and community-based. And so really what Connexions is about is trying to break through some of the barriers and allowing people to be able to create, rip, mix, and burn educational content much in the same type way that you might imagine people creating musical content. Okay, and the key thing about the publishing industry is it tends to disconnect people. Okay, it tends to disconnect authors from the so-called users. Okay, and basically what the publishing process does is it creates a class of shutouts. Right, people who are not supposed to contribute their knowledge back to the world's knowledge commons, if you will. Okay, K through 12 teachers are not supposed to become textbook authors. Students are not supposed to become authors, and just general readers are not invited into this author community. Okay, so generally, what we find is that the current practices of publishing tend to actually disconnect ideas. Okay, and disconnect people. And it's even worse if you happen to speak one of these languages that isn't English, right? And increasingly, as more and more people get on the net around the world, fewer and fewer people are going to have English as their first language, and they're also being shut out of this process. Okay? So Connexions came about 6.5 years ago when I and a number of other people at Rice University were trying to think about these kind of ideas, and we were frustrated, right? There was an itch, three itches actually, that needed to be scratched. The first was the difficulty in connecting ideas, right? In my case, as a signal processing professor, showing how math relates to science, relates to engineering and applications, government policy, intellectual property, right? Showing how ideas are really all interconnected, okay? If you're a K through 12 teacher, grade levels are stovepiped. Grade 3 math, when you're in grade 3, you're not supposed to be thinking about grade 4 math, right? I would argue this is a problem, okay? And even though I come from a university, I would argue that universities are great places not of integrating knowledge and information, but actually of disintegrating it, putting it into departments that aren't supposed to talk to each other and stovepiping information. Okay, so this connectivity was one problem. The second problem was the problem of making it so hard with the regular chalk and talk lecture type structure with paper textbooks to be able to engage students in interactive exploration, because it's really in exploring ideas and doing things that we actually learn, and that learning is really reinforced. Then the final thing is, it at least then was very, very difficult to build communities around content. I had in my mind this idea of building a textbook that would connect, like I said, math to science, to engineering, to ethics and government. There's no way I could do that on my own. I needed to be able to build a collaborative community of people to work on this content and develop it, okay? And as a result of the fact that it's so hard to build communities around content, it's an absolutely glacial pace to develop a book. Has anybody here ever written a book? Okay, can take 3 to 5 years, right, from sort of conceptualizing the book to actually having it come out in print. In the engineering disciplines, science disciplines, think medicine, often the book is out of date by the time it's actually published. Okay, so these were the itches that needed to be scratched. And really you can think of Connexions as a reaction to this, and trying to create both a technology system and a community system for people to be able to create, rip, mix, and burn their educational content. Yes, sir?
Consideration given the current price of textbooks?
Oh, absolutely.
K-12,
absolutely.
60 bucks.
Yeah. So part of that I'm going to address in about 5 or 10 minutes, but this is becoming increasingly important. States across the United States are spending hundreds of millions of dollars per year in textbooks. The average community college student spends more money on textbooks than tuition. Okay? And we're talking about hundreds of dollars for textbooks. Let's just give out an example. $120 textbook, an author might make $3, $4 from that book. Okay, so I'll get back to that later. Okay, so is everybody with the program here of what we're trying to do? Okay, so really this is related to this idea of the open access movement. And the key thing is that it draws inspiration from the open source movement. So the two key ideas behind open source: one, modularizing your software so that a community can work on it, a lot of people. And second, opening up the intellectual property so that it's easy for them to do so. We're applying those exact same ideas to content. Okay? And so here's the way that you can kind of think of this. Think of a sort of thought experiment of taking every book in the world, okay? And imagine ripping the pages out of every book in the world. That would seem like it's a lot of chaos, but imagine if you could organize these pages in some sort of vast global repository, right? That's where all these ideas are interconnected, where all of the information is open for anyone to look at. It's free for them to look at. It's free for them to contribute. And not only that, the time scale of interaction with the material from gestation to actual publishing is on the order of seconds and not years. Okay, so imagine we could do this. And imagine, in addition, that we could bring people into the equation, right? Grassroots, organized, bottom-up communities of people from all around the world in all of the world's languages. Okay, so that's really what Connexions is about, is trying to create what we call a commons or a knowledge ecosystem. Okay, I think this would be cool if we could do this, right? This is what we're trying to do. Okay, so really, you can think of it as a place where anyone in the world can create, rip, mix, and burn, and I mean anyone, right, their own educational content. Okay, so what I'm going to do is spend about 5 or so minutes talking about who's using Connexions, which is our particular system. Then I'll give you a demo, and then I'll talk about some of the bigger issues. Sound good, people? Okay. So let's talk about who's creating content. So here's a group. There's a group of electrical engineering professors from around the world. The people in this picture are from Georgia Tech, Ohio State, University of Wisconsin, Michigan. We also have people at Rice and Cambridge. These are traditional textbook type authors, okay? But these are people who are unhappy with the status quo, who are pooling their efforts to build one electrical engineering super textbook that each one of these schools will be able to customize to their own curriculum and draw upon and not have to reinvent the wheel on writing these books, okay? So this is a traditional class of authors. Kitty Jones is from this shutout class, okay? She's a private music teacher and mom from Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. And she decided a few years ago to start contributing her music content for kids to Connexions, okay? She's one of these shutouts who's not supposed to become an author. And if you look just in December of 2005, her material had over 600, basically averaging about 600,000 page views per month on this music material, okay? And getting to your question about the cost of materials, a large share of these are actually coming from United States K through 12 institutions because it's the music curriculum that's the first thing that tends to get cut out as schools are cutting budgets across the country, okay? So tremendous amount of usage, and she's, again, an example of one of these shutouts, okay? What's an example of ripping content, making it your own? So there's a grassroots organized bunch of graduate students, actually, in University of Texas, El Paso, who decided that they wanted to translate a bunch of our engineering content into Spanish. They call the project DS Spanish. Within a week of some of this material going up, it became some of our most popular material and making large penetration into Latin America, used at Monterey Tech and a number of other institutions across Latin America. Okay. About the same time, a translation organization from Taiwan called OOPS and Texas Instruments Japan started a project that's translating our Connexions materials into Japanese, Chinese, Thai, and a number of other Asian languages, with Vietnamese and Korean rapidly coming on board. So the idea of having content in a myriad different languages, having people be able to keep the content continuously up to date in all of these languages. Okay, the idea of mix is the idea of being able to generate your own customized course or your own customized textbook, okay? National Instruments is a company in Austin, Texas, who are actually contributing a lot of their technical training materials to Connexions, and they're actually building, much like the Adobe Acrobat Player allows you to view PDF files for free on web pages. NI is actually developing a free what's called LabVIEW Player that's going to allow anyone in the world to be able to manipulate and play with their really, really interesting simulations that can be used to teach science and engineering. Okay, so that's kind of exciting. So they're mixing that stuff in with our Connexions content. Teachers Without Borders has been involved with us for about 6 months. They're in 84 countries around the world. They do teacher certification and teacher training. They're going to be putting their entire repository of teacher certification materials into Connexions. And the key thing here is they're going to be able to do localization and translation of these materials so that they can be used in all of these different countries. Some other people who are putting content into this commons, UC Merced. Has anybody heard of UC Merced? It's the new University of California school in the Central Valley. They've committed to putting much of their science and engineering curricula into Connexions. They actually have a facilitator at UC Merced to develop this content. We're also working closely with AMD. Anybody heard of the 50 by 15 project? Very interesting. They aim to bring 50% of the world internet connectivity by 2015. And so they're basically going into remote parts of the world, bringing internet connectivity and also computer hardware to remote communities. And we're partnering with them to deliver a lot of educational content. We also have a whole bunch of other projects that you can read quicker than I can say. Some of the more interesting ones, we're going to be developing the top 10 community college courses and Connexions, and a number of other projects. Yes, sir?
There's sort of a big one that doesn't seem to get mentioned, the MIT OpenCourseWare project.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to get to that. They're one of the projects that's also supported by the Hewlett Foundation. And basically, you can think of Connexions as a logical extension of the MIT project, in that MIT OpenCourseWare contains only MIT material. Whereas in Connexions, it's a global repository where people from all universities, all walks of life are welcome to contribute.
So is MIT contributing to Connexions?
So they're currently focusing primarily on pushing content into MIT OpenCourseWare. However, there are a number of faculty who are interested in getting involved. There's some very interesting questions around licensing, intellectual property, XML, things like this that I think are going to become clear later on. But yeah, any other questions at this point? Some of the sort of maybe just more interesting ones that are coming up. The government of Vietnam is going to be deploying Connexions across the country to support engineering and science education in that country. They want to use all the materials in English, but they actually want to link to sort of Cliff Notes versions of all of these materials that are translated into Vietnamese, so that the students can actually learn in English, but they can have basically materials that help them learn quicker in their native language. We're also going to be developing a project in North Korea. This sounds bizarre, but there's actually a Pyongyang University of Science and Technology that is being developed on a beautiful campus in downtown Pyongyang, North Korea. And we are actually going to be deploying Connexions there for supporting their curriculum. And a lot of that content is actually going to come from South Korea. And I'd be happy to talk to people about this later. Okay, Bern. So this is where things get kind of interesting and different from some of the other open content projects out there like MIT OpenCourseWare. So Bern to us means the ability to generate a physical object. It means the ability to generate a CD or a DVD-ROM from your course that you've mixed together. It also means the ability to make a paper textbook, okay, from the material. Okay? And the key thing about these paper textbooks, though, is that they're modularly organized. They can be authored by a community and just drawn together by the person who wants to make the book. They can be personalized for a particular class, and they can be completely up to date. So you can imagine a scenario where a community college instructor on the first day of class gives their students a test, finds out all the remediation that's necessary for the class, goes in that afternoon, pulls their book together in Connexions, and has it delivered to the class the next day by FedEx. Okay? So I'll hand this around. This is an engineering textbook. You can have a look at it. It's got lots of mathematics in it, completely automatically generated with the table of contents, index, and all of that stuff. This is a music book. Okay? Similar. I'll just hand these around. So if you want to hold up that engineering textbook for a second, get to the last point here. This is a book that would probably cost about a student about $122, okay, in a bookstore today. Any guesses how much that would cost a student?
5.
Wow, that's a bit low. That one costs $5. $22 to the student in hardback. Okay? And that $22 includes not only profit for the on-demand publisher, it's called Coop, who is the on-demand press that's making the book, but a small sustainability revenue stream that goes to Connexions to sustain the nonprofit aspect of the project, and a revenue stream that goes into a pot that allows anyone in the developing world to be able to get this book for free. Okay, so we're kind of excited about this because basically we believe that this idea of publish on demand is going to change the economics of publishing. Okay, and basically what it's going to lead to is the impending eBayization, right, or disintermediation, cutting out of the middleman of academic publishing. Okay, because the only difference between this $122 textbook and a $22 textbook is a couple dollars to the author that might get royalties in a traditional publishing scenario, and a very large profit and costs for the academic publisher. Okay? Very important, though, that we're dealing with this long tail. We're not talking about publishing Harry Potter books here, right, that sell millions and millions of copies. We're talking about small run books, books on hypergeometric partial differential equations, right, that might sell 200 copies, that might sell 2,000 copies per year. But the key thing is that there's tremendous area under this curve, right, that's sustaining, has tremendous sustaining possibilities for projects like Connexions. Okay, so we're kind of excited about the ability to be able to burn these content. So currently within Connexions, we have about 145 courses And as far as usage stats, just going back to January 2006, we were logging about 16 million hits per month. That's about 500,000 unique visitors from 157 countries and growing by about 12% per month. So that just gives you a sense of the thirst out there for free and open content. Okay, so let's talk quick about the enablers behind this, and then I'll give you a quick demo. How am I doing on time? Yeah, okay. So enablers. The first is XML. How many people know about XML? Okay, this is a big difference between us and other projects in that Connexions is not a collection of PDF files that are impossible for somebody to download and customize. It's basically these pages that we've torn out of these textbooks are encapsulated in XML that turns every page into its Lego block, right? Where the nubs allow us to recombine this material in myriad different ways, okay? So the key thing is we can take this ecosystem, right? All these pages in their primordial soup state, right? And we can organize them into very powerful learning machines. Okay, and these are learning machines, or courses, they're web courses, they're paper books, and these can be customized for each individual. Okay, so you can imagine a world in the not too distant future where every person can have their own customized learning materials. And these materials can be used in many, many different ways. If you think of writing a module on how to invert a matrix, right, that can be used in hundreds of different kinds of courses, right? Not just the one where the author originally intended it for. Okay. The other thing that's really neat about XML is the power of semantic markup. How many people have heard of things like MathML? Okay, so the really neat thing, and I'll show you more in the demo, but the cool thing is all the formulas and connections are encoded in something called content MathML, which means they actually encode the semantic content of the formula. It's not a picture of math, it's actual math. So encoded inside this MathML is the fact that C that's indexed by this index n equals some integral of some function times a sine wave, okay? That's very powerful. It means you can cut and paste formulas from Connexions into Mathematica and they work. Okay, so you can start to manipulate formulae. It means you'll be able to interact and explore every single formula in your science, engineering, and mathematics book, okay, which we're pretty excited about. There's also a bit less well-developed, but moving along, chemistry markup languages that actually understand how chemicals are organized, MusicXML that understands how the musical scores are organized. Okay, and this is a tremendously powerful tool for the future that allows you to be able to reuse content very easily. Okay, the other thing that's really powerful about XML is the fact we have very rich metadata behind all this content that allows us to connect and show the interconnections between ideas. So that when you're in a course and the professor talks about, oh, you remember L'Hopital's rule from calculus, we're going to use that now, and basically 4/5 of the class, their eyes glaze over because they forget L'Hopital's rule. Well, they'll have right at their fingertips there links back to this prerequisite material that they might have forgotten. Okay, and also links forward to information about material that they might be that might excite them or illustrate the concepts. Okay. And this is precisely really what was driving me when I wanted to show how some of this somewhat seemingly dry mathematics in the area of signal processing actually relates, right, to tremendous range of different ideas that are floating out there in the world, from really cool technology to the business world to government and the intellectual property world. Okay, the second big enabler is intellectual property. Okay, and if you remember back to, I started everything with this analogy with music, right, and nobody brought up the fact that we can talk about create, rip, mix, and burn, but in fact a lot of that is illegal, right? It's called Napster, it's called file sharing, right? So it's critical that if we're going to do this for educational content, we have to get it right from the start, right? We have to set things up in a way that it's not illegal to share all of this content, okay? So we have to make content safe to share, and in a sense, just like XML gives us a common vocabulary for how to connect ideas together, we need a common legal vocabulary for how to share content. And the inspiration here, again, is back towards things like the GPL and the BSD licenses that make open source software work, okay? And we were all ready to develop our own licenses back in 2000 or so when we were really happy to learn about the Creative Commons. How many people know about the Creative Commons? Perfect. You might not know that Glenn Brown is on staff here at Google, who is the second executive director of the Creative Commons. Okay, and the key thing is at the bottom of every page in Connections, every resource or course in Connections, there's a link that says that when you click on it, tells you exactly what you're allowed to do. Right? In fact, it tells you that you're allowed to share this content in many, many different ways, as long as you attribute the original author. Okay? And people often usually ask before this point, they say, well, why are authors actually interested in getting involved in Connections? In particular, if they're not going to make royalties off their textbook that would be sold by a traditional publisher. And the key thing is that if you ask a professor or an academic why they write books and course notes, they're not writing it to make money. In fact, they're writing it to make an impact. And the critical thing about things like a Creative Commons license, in particular this attribution license, is that it allows their content to make the broadest possible impact in the world, including people making textbooks out of their material, people weaving together web courses out of their material, etc. Okay? And critically, behind the Creative Commons license, the easy-to-read stuff, there's a very carefully crafted legal verbiage that's being translated and moved to jurisdictions around the world. And this is really taking off. So there's probably by now over 50 million instantiations of the Creative Commons license out there in a lot more than just text and simulations, the kind of things that you would find in Connections, also in the video world and in the music world. And this is a very important movement that I think we need to support. Okay, so maybe at this point I'll move to a demo. Any questions at this point? Yeah.
Quality control.
Oh, you're good. Okay, so let me defer that for like 5-10 minutes. Yeah. Question back here. Okay, so maybe I'll just hop over and show some things here. Just to give you a feel. Can everybody hear me okay? I feel like a keyboard player. Okay. So this is our the Connections site. It's at cnx.org. All of the content is freely available for anyone in the world to look at. In fact, about 95% of our hits actually come in from Google. Okay, so we thank you very much. Which somehow turns out, I think, due to the interlinking of the material, the fact that it's so interconnected with each other and with other web resources around the world, our Google karma is really quite high. You can click on these various tabs to learn more. We have an entire suite of open source software that people are helping us develop from around the world. You can browse through all of our different content. Let me just give you an indication of who out there is developing some of our developing stuff. I'll make the font really big, and I'll just sort of scan down here so you can get a sense. See, this is the critical thing about Connections. It allows all of these different institutions, right, and people to get involved contributing content. Okay, and that's something that you're never going to be able to do from a institution-only open courseware type site. Okay, so really, we intend to be really cross-institutional. Okay, and let me just let me go in and show you an actual course here. Okay, it's actually a course on our XML language called CNXML, which is a markup language. It's very similar to just HTML and people who know LaTeX, but it's very, very easy to use. This is a course. A course is just a collection of modules. Let's just jump in and have a look at one of these modules. This is a module on XML itself, sort of being a little bit self-referential here. There we go. Okay, so let me make the font go down a bit. So this is basically looks like a web page. What it is a very fancy web page that's encoded in XML. It has all kinds of information. You can learn more about the content here at the bottom, who wrote it, who owns it, who is maintaining it, who has the copyright. We have a version control system, so like CVS. So we keep every version of all the content and Connections all the way back through time. This is very useful for both tracking the changes of content and also some instructors might want to lock in at a particular version. We can also easily generate automatically, tell people how to cite this content, because increasingly, much like Wikipedia, people are using Connexions content in scholarly work. We also have this idea of interlinking is very important. So here we have a sort of text-based indication that this XML basics module is but one link in a big, vast graph. Okay, and these are some of the first neighbor nodes that are linked to this node in the graph. And they have metadata associated with them. For example, these are all examples of XML, and these are all contain supplemental information on XML. And the key thing is these can be overridden and customized by different instructors or authors. Yes, sir?
Have you considered something along the lines of Gardner's 7 different intelligences of the same material but written from different perspectives?
Oh, absolutely. So we actually envision that this kind of thing is going to actually happen sort of in a grassroots kind of way, that people are going to take the content and rewrite it from these different perspectives. Yeah, that's a really neat point. It'd be neat to do some examples with that.
Yes, it didn't seem to be on the side that thinking of that.
Yeah. And actually, these are free-form sort of content. The author of a module or of a course can actually customize all of the information that they want to appear over there. Okay. We also can pull out of our repository all of the similar content, related content. This is much like going to the library and you have a card catalog number, pulling out the book, realizing it's not what you want, right? But looking or scanning around on the shelf to find all the material that's sort of closely related. Okay, so that's like this course is using this content. And then finally, because it's in XML, it's trivial to restyle, right? Restyle the content to have a different, right, look and feel of the content. Okay, and this is critical. Let me just bring up my bookmarks here. Critical to allow other people to be able to have, sort of take ownership over the content. So for example, when a person's pulling together a course and teaching at Georgia Tech, they'll be able to have a Georgia Tech style sheet. So even if they're using my content in their course, it'll have a holistic feel of Georgia Tech, right? Or of Stanford, right? So that's critical to us, the ability for organizations and institutions to be able to style the content and sort of make it their own. Okay, and this is also related to things like quality control and portals that I'll get to in a couple minutes. Okay. Any other questions at this point before I plow along? Okay, we also have a facility, basically a same scaled down facility that we use to generate the textbooks that can basically generate a PDF file of each individual module for printing. I won't demo that now, but you basically go up here and click print. That's critical. I don't know, has anybody here ever printed a web page? Have you ever had problems printing a web page, right? The beautiful thing about this is it actually generates equivalent of a page in a book, okay? And so maybe at this point I will ask if there's any other questions, and then maybe I could just show you quickly how you actually contribute a module to Connexions. Yes, sir?
Can you page balance a printed version?
Can I?
Can you page balance printed versions so that things line up on the right side?
Oh, yeah. So in fact, we're developing a range of tools for the print. One is the idea of completely automatic printing for basically from XML to a book. But the other possibility is export into any number of formats, like Word format, LaTeX, or PDF, so that you can basically rearrange things however you like. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, those books that you saw right now were generated XML to LaTeX, or TeX, and then to PDF and print. Yes, sir? So, good point. So the base software is an open software package called Zope and Plone. We are huge fans of both of those. And then Connexions is basically built on top of those. We've built a lot of extensions and other aspects to them. And if you check out like the software tab, all of our software that we've developed is all open sourced and available and actually being built on. Pardon me? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Other questions? Yes?
Do you crawl the web for content that's formatted according to your XML schemas? So say MIT OpenCourseWare publishes their math lessons.
Right.
Do you crawl the web for that and index it yourself?
Oh, good point. Yeah, so the question was, do we crawl the web and link to other content? Not currently. Currently, we think of Connections as a repository, right, where people come to put their content in. I think in the future what we're going to see is, and is already starting, the emergence of portals, what are called, Hewlett Foundation's very interested in portals, where basically they will crawl the web and then be able to index material from various open courseware sites, Connections, etc. Okay? Could be in the future that Connections also develops a portal like that, but for right now we're happy to let people like Google and these other portals help us index all of this material. Yeah, good point. Other questions? So, so a last little thing to show you is the idea of how you develop content in Connections, because it's XML. And until a couple years ago, this was a big barrier to content creators, because we'd say everyone is welcome to contribute to Connections as long as you write in XML, okay? And there's really two very important things that have moved forward in the past couple of years. The first is we have just started beta testing the world's first WYSIWYG XML open source editor. I didn't get all those in the right order, but it's called Etna, and if you go to the software link, you will actually be able to find it. This is something we're starting to collaborate with a bunch of people on. And so this will basically be the equivalent of like a Dreamweaver type thing for XML editing. So we're very excited about that. The other is we have a Microsoft Word or OpenOffice converter. Okay? Actually, it's an OpenOffice converter, Microsoft Word converter. So I'll just show you quickly how this works. So here's a Word doc. You see it's pretty simple, but it's got a lot of different stuff in it. It has some hyperlinks. It's got some pictures, some bullets. Right? This is fairly typical of a lot of educational type content. And now what I'm going to do is log in. Anyone can get an account. It's like getting a Gmail account. And in Connections, we have a number of different workspaces. So first, every individual gets your own workspace where you can put content, right, in order to work on it. No one in the world can see that stuff except you. And then we have collaborative work groups. For example, if all of us in this room wanted to get together, form a work group so that we could have a collaborative workspace where we could work together, that's very easy to set up. Very soon we're going to have work group forums, so it's very easy to organize sort of groups to work together on content. I'll show you though right now how we just create a new module. And here you can really see the sort of Plone feel. So we're going to add a new module to the repository. This is clicking through to basically agree to the Creative Commons license, right? Sort of like the site license aspect. And now I just have to say whether I'm going to use some FML. I might, so I'll just keep that on there. And now all I have to do is give it a title. And oops. Okay. So now this has basically tricked me into creating a bunch of metadata. And now the module will be created. It's going to be blank. And it drops us out into a nice little editor down below here. But I'm just going to go straight into importing this Word OpenOffice document. And basically all I have to do is just browse over to it. The usual kind of thing, uploading something just like an email attachment. Now what it's actually doing is piping the Word doc through OpenOffice, exporting as XML, running a parser over it to convert into our CNXML. It takes about, I don't know, 10 seconds or so. Here we are. And it drops you off into a little editor that you can edit, but I'll go straight to showing you that in about 2 minutes, right, you were able to generate, right, content. It figured out all the sectioning, right? Figured out the figures, hyperlinks, and even that table there at the bottom, right? So it's getting increasingly easy to contribute material to projects like Connections, even in something as powerful as XML, which we're pretty excited about because this is much more usable and reusable than anything in PDF, for example. Okay, so let's just go back, talk about the last couple things. Let's talk about protecting the commons. Okay, so we have an inclusive open contribution policy, right? So that means anyone can put things into Connections. right? So this means there's going to be all kinds of stuff in there, okay? Including stuff like this that took us a while to find, which is in fact a beautiful, okay, this is great stuff. It's on lingerie. The problem is that in fact all of the content was actually plagiarized from a very well-known French historical journal. Okay, so this was plagiarized content. And not only that, when you link off to the supposed course website, it's this person's lingerie selling website, right? So we have to figure out how we're going to deal with content that like on the bottom, is illegal. It's actually plagiarized. Or on the top, just merely sort of dodgy, right? So how are we going to do that? Well, the way that this is done traditionally in the academic world is through some kind of peer review procedure, right? And this is a very slow, time-consuming process, right? And the problem is that peer review, you pretty much could easily say at this point that the traditional academic peer review system is broken. Okay? It takes so long to get a paper peer-reviewed, traditional academic paper, and out in most journals that very often the material is obsolete by the time it appears in print, okay? Much like with print textbooks. So what we want is some sort of new scheme that's both can keep the peer review up to date but also be inclusive and scalable. That's really, really important. So the issue then is, how do we find good content and how do we direct users to good content? Google is one way, certainly, right? If you Google for it, you're going to find stuff that Google thinks is good, right? But then there's just the question of what is quality, who's going to decide what's high quality, and even the lines are blurring between who is an expert, right? And things like Wikipedia and bloggers are really putting a lot of pressure on both the media out there and other types of academic presses, okay? So what are we going to do? So in Connexions, we're developing a social software approach. So we have an idea that we call lenses. And the critical thing of a lens is that any user can go into the entire Connexions repository. But they can also go in via a lens. For example, if someone types in a search via like a Google search, they're going to find some content that rises to the top of the search and other content that goes to the bottom of the search. So if you will, Google is like a lens on Connexions. But we can have even more formal lenses. For example, institutions that put their content into Connexions will be able to have their own portal. For example, if there's a bunch of University of Michigan content in Connexions, you'll be able to go to umich.cnx.org and find all of the content that University of Michigan has put in. By definition, this is content that the University of Michigan thinks is good enough, right? It's good enough to teach at the University of Michigan. Okay. Similarly, professional organizations like ACM or the IEEE could also get involved and develop their own peer review processes and have these lenses. Okay. And the inspiration here is social software ideas like Delicious, Delirious, Flickr. Okay. And I think increasingly we're going to see things like this even creeping into the academic space. Okay. Any questions about this peer review idea? Yeah.
Well, okay, for science and math, usually, at least when you get to the very cutting edge, it's like this equation is accepted. When you get to the more social and humanities, get into, shall we say, more interesting personal debate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, Wikipedia, you get anything controversial.
Absolutely.
You get edit boards going on, etc.
Exactly. So, classic example, the University of Cambridge philosophy department versus the University of Oxford philosophy department, right? Yeah, two very different points of view. So the key thing here is that we don't want to exclude either of those communities from partaking. So what you could have is a Cambridge lens, right? So all this content can be in Connexions, but when you go in via this Cambridge lens, you'll see the stuff that's their point of view. And when you go in via the Oxford lens, you'll see the stuff that they think is important from their point of view.
I guess I'm forgetting, can you easily edit material that say you have submitted as reports, you might go in and
Okay, excellent point. So Connexions is a little bit like a wiki, but different. Okay? The key thing in Connexions is there's a bit more, you are technologically able to edit anything that anyone has contributed because the Creative Commons license allows you to do that. But what we do is we put sort of things in place to try to enforce collaboration above the kind of wars of editing over the same piece of content. Okay, so what you would do in that case, for example, if there was sorry to pick on Cambridge and Oxford, but you would basically, the Oxford people would be able to fork a new copy of any Cambridge material and change it the way that they think it needs to be changed. And then the Cambridge and Oxford authors would both be co-authors, but the Cambridge author would be notified of this and could have their name taken off automatically if they so wished. Right? Does that kind of make sense? So the idea is try to create within the software sort of a schemes to enable more dialogue over the material.
I guess Oxford and Cambridge may not get along with debates and hunting competitions. I'm picturing something a little bit more severe, like say Holocaust deniers or North Korean propaganda.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is, and it's a very interesting question, and it's very. Well, I mean, some of this will take offline after the talk, but you bring up a lot of really good points because, well, I'll just say the last thing I can say is that all Connexions can legally do is take down illegal content. The minute that Connexions starts becoming it's a lens for the entire, a gatekeeper for the commons, there's two problems. One, it's totally not scalable, right? Because we're not like Wikipedia in that sense. And second, it basically changes us from the safe harbor provisions, right, as an internet service provider, makes us liable for the content. So there's some very interesting, tricky issues around that. Okay, so let me just end by just saying the kind of things that we have going on right now and then invite more questions. So we're developing a lot more tools. I mentioned already the XML editor. We're also, there are people out there using the software that drives Connexions, these customizations of Plone. We call that Raptos, and you can go to raptos.org. That means to weave in ancient Greek. And there are a number of people and organizations that are running our software just as a content management system. We're also developing tools for translation. I don't mean automatic translation, but to enable easier finding materials in different languages and enabling people to translate materials really, really easily and keep content up to date once it's been translated. So if the English version is updated, how does the Hungarian translator know to go update their material? I already mentioned about peer review. We're building workflows for that so that organizations can basically be building their own peer review processes within Connexions. We're also developing a distributed infrastructure so that there's not just a server farm currently in Houston at Rice University, but we actually distribute this repository around the world. We envision in the next year probably putting up a server in Germany and another one in Asia, and then basically building things from there. So there's some very interesting issues around distributing a content management server. Lots of work going on in semantic stuff around XML, around semantic search. We're going to have, already in alpha, one of our collaborators in IUB in Bremen has a MathML search engine. So you'll actually be able to type in that you're looking for a certain kind of equation, and you're going to be able to bring that up. That's very exciting. I already mentioned a bunch of content projects. The most exciting content projects right now are in dynamic content. The idea that since Connexions is a living repository, we're interested in content where people are actually updating it on the minute. For example, imagine an atmospheric sciences textbook where all the tables, right, with temperatures and wind flow patterns are up to the minute, right, accurate, right, as of the minute that you generate the paper textbook for print. Okay, and there's a number of organizations that are interested in getting involved with that. So I think I will end there and then ask if there's any last questions, and then sort of if people want to take things offline. Yes, sir.
Well, so you mentioned that in many cases authors aren't creating textbooks, aren't writing textbooks for the money, but there are a lot of educational editors out there. Are you going to be putting a lot of people out of work? And how do you imagine that there might be other kinds of jobs that would be created if, for example, a large preponderance of universities switch to publicly generated textbooks?
Okay, so that's a great question. To answer the first part, your question was, do you see what's going to happen to all these editors? What's going to happen to this educational industry and publishing industry? And is there, and the broader question is there going to be money involved here somewhere? Are there going to be companies? And I think that we really just have to look over to the open source world and see that around the Linux operating system, there's been an entire industry developed, right? For example, Red Hat, right, is a company that's in the business of selling services around this free open source software, okay? For example, a lot of institutions and people don't, when they put Linux on their workstation, they actually pay 99 bucks to Red Hat to put Linux. Why do they do that? Quality control, a 1-800 number when things break, right? Et cetera, right? It's all on one CD-ROM and things like that. So we hypothesized, right, when we started Connexions 6.5 years ago, that if this content commons was really viable, there would be companies sprouting up around the outside of it. In fact, there already are. Okay, one of them is this tremendous resurgence in or growth in publish-on-demand companies like Coop, like Lulu Press, which incidentally was started by Bob Young, okay, of Red Hat, okay, to be a Red Hat for the open content world. And I see that these editors don't necessarily have to be put out of business, because I think there's going to be a very vibrant industry growing up around this open content, okay? So does that answer the point? Yeah, there are even for-profit lenses out there. Check out facultyof1000.com. People pay $29 a month to have a lens on the internet to find the best, most up-to-date, coolest stuff in the bios and medical sciences. Other questions? Yeah?
Do you have musicians and authors of, say, fiction uploading?
Okay, interesting. Do we have musicians and authors of fiction uploading content? We do not. I don't think currently we have any fiction, but that's absolutely possible. We've had numerous requests to people to start projects in like recipes, right? Gardening, things that would be outside of traditional sort of textbook world. As far as music, we have a number of musicians contributing. However, it tends to be more on the music theory or musicology side rather than using Connexions to post their music, right? I don't think that this is this is not iTunes, right? There are better places, I think, to post and organize sort of just pure musical content. That being said, anything that you can do on the web, you can post in Connexions, simulations, music, videos, all things like that. Yeah.
It would seem like a lot of fiction for university courses would be out of copyright.
Oh, absolutely. So
could you conceivably upload?
Yeah. So okay. So I lied. In fact, there are already people going to things like Project Gutenberg and other projects, uploading Shakespeare, for example. A rather large proportion of the textbooks that K through 12 institutions buy are actually in the public domain. So, yeah. So if you do Shakespeare in our search bar, you'll actually find there's already some Shakespeare in there, yeah. Other questions? Okay, so I'd like to thank everybody, and we'll be hanging around after, so if you have any questions for Joey or for me, just feel free to come bug us, and if you have any ideas on better ways we can harness all the power behind Google, that would be superb as well. Thanks a lot.